Sign it, Tylee! Shannan hissed, the mahogany desk acting as a barricade between our two worlds. As of this moment, you are legally dead to this family. No name, no trust fund, no legacy. You are a nobody. I met her icy gaze, my voice a calm, freezing shadow that seemed to still the room. You think you're burying me, Mother. You've forgotten that I am a seed. One day you'll realize you're standing on a stage I built with the very pieces of me you threw away. She laughed, a cold, jagged sound that echoed with arrogance. Go then. Fade away into the dark. I turned without a word, leaving the stifling warmth of her lies for the brutal honesty of the night. I walked toward the perimeter of the estate, the artificial heat of the manor still clinging to my skin until I crossed the final threshold and felt the atmosphere shift violently. The winter wind in Chicago doesn't just blow, it carves. It seeks out every gap in your coat, every weakness in your spirit, and settles deep in your bones. As I stood before the iron gates of the Gonzalez estate, the cold felt personal. Inside the grand ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of expensive orchids and vintage champagne, a sharp contrast to the biting frost I'd left at the doorstep. I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of the silver locket hidden beneath my dress, the only thing I had left of my father. Don't just stand there like a ghost, my sister Alexis whispered as she glided past me, her silk dress shimmering like snakeskin. She didn't look at me. She looked right through me. That was the theme of the evening. I moved toward the center of the room, the sea of Chicago's elite parting as if I carried a plague. On the magnificent marble staircase, my mother, Shannan, stood there, her silhouette silhouetted against the chandelier. She looked like a queen, her figure perfect, her eyes devoid of any maternal warmth. The room fell silent as she tapped a crystal glass. Her voice was clear, practiced, and utterly lethal. She spoke of legacy, of the upcoming IPO, and the necessity of purifying the family brand to ensure investor confidence. Then her gaze landed on me. To move forward, she announced, we must shed the burdens that hold us back. Tylee is no longer a part of this house or this name. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. My brother, Dylan, smirked from the front row, already calculating his increased share of the inheritance. Shannan signaled for silence, her eyes burning with a cold fire. I want it understood, she commanded, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. As of this moment, Tylee Ryan Gonzalez is a stranger. You will delete her contact. You will block her numbers. To associate with her is to associate with a failure we have officially excised. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I didn't move. My knuckles whitened as I clutched my father's locket. True wealth isn't in a name you're given. It's in the character you keep when that name is stolen. The formal dissolution of familial ties sat on a mahogany podium. It was a clinical document, 5 pages of legal jargon designed to strip me of my inheritance, my trust funds, and my identity. Shannan gestured toward the pen. Sign it, Tylee. End this quietly. The crowd leaned in, waiting for the tears, the pleading, the breakdown they expected from the weak youngest daughter. I walked toward the podium, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at the ink. I picked up the pen with my left hand, a small, deliberate choice that made Shannan's eyes narrow. She knew I was right-handed, but she didn't understand the defiance in the switch. I signed the document with a steady, flowing script. No hesitation, no tremors. As the last stroke dried, Shannan leaned in, her voice a poisonous whisper. You're a nobody now, Tylee. Without this family, you don't exist. I met her gaze, my voice calm and low enough for only her to hear. A tree doesn't stop growing just because you cut off one branch to save the view. I am not losing a family. I am gaining my own soul. What she didn't know was that my silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. Through Hollis, I'd spent months studying the fine print of our family's holdings. By signing this document, I was legally severed from the Gonzalez name, but I was also severed from their hidden liabilities and the massive private debts Shannan had accrued to fund Lumina's expansion. In the eyes of U.S. law, I was now a free agent, unburdened by the rot of their crumbling empire. I was no longer a liability. I was a ghost. I turned and walked toward the exit, my back to the luxury I was leaving behind. The sound of dozens of phones clicking filled the room, the sound of my family and friends blocking me in real time. Dylan and Alexis shared a triumphant look, convinced they had won the war for the estate. I didn't care. As I reached the coach station, I saw Mrs. Gable, the elderly lady who had served our family for 3 decades. She looked frail, her eyes red from crying because she'd been told she was being let go without her promised pension. "It's okay, Mrs. Gable," I said softly, unwrapping my warm cashmere scarf and draping it around her thin shoulders. She tried to protest, but I squeezed her hand. Kindness is the only currency that never devalues in a recession. I tucked a small, inconspicuous business card into her pocket. It bore no name, only a number and the words Vanguard Alpha. "Call this number on Monday," I whispered. "There's a supervisor position waiting for you." The confusion in her eyes turned to a flicker of hope. I stepped out into the Chicago blizzard, the freezing air hitting me like a physical wall. I didn't have a coat, but for the first time in 28 years, I didn't feel the cold. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, seeing a notification from a secure, encrypted line. It wasn't a plea from my mother or a taunt from my siblings. It was a message from Hollis. "The acquisition of the First City block is complete. They have no idea who the landlord is yet." I looked back at the glowing lights of the estate one last time. They thought they had erased me. They didn't realize they had just given me the freedom to burn their world down. The city lights behind me blurred into a smear of cold neon as I drove away from the estate. That night, the Chicago wind felt like a clean slate, whipping the scent of my mother's expensive perfume off my skin. I had stepped out into the blizzard a nobody, yet I carried a secret momentum that no one in that ballroom could perceive. 6 months later, the modest loft I occupied in the West Loop had become the nerve center of a silent revolution. The walls were bare, the furniture functional, but the air hummed with the steady vibration of high-end servers. It was a sterile sanctuary where I lived as a ghost, rebuilding a life from the digital dust Shannan had tried to settle over my name. Hollis sat across from me, his face illuminated by the blue glare of a wall-mounted monitor. We were waiting for the live stream of Lumina Global's mid-year keynote. The silence in the room was heavy, almost suffocating, like the air before a lightning strike. Suddenly, the screen flickered to life. My mother appeared, standing on a stage that looked like a temple of glass and chrome. She looked radiant, her smile a masterpiece of cosmetic perfection. "Innovation," Shannan began, her voice projected with practiced grace, "is not just about creating the new. It is about perfecting what already exists. It is about fixing the mistakes of nature." The screen behind her shimmered, and then I saw it. I saw myself, or rather, a version of me that didn't exist. "Meet Lumina AI," Shannan announced. The digital avatar stepped forward into the light. It had my eyes, my chin, the exact curve of my smile, but the expression was hollow, a compliant, eager-to-please caricature of the daughter I used to be. The real Tylee had been messy, rebellious, and independent. This digital ghost was a perfected daughter, a marketing tool designed to sell a brand of family harmony that Shannan had destroyed with a single signature. It was the ultimate theft. She hadn't just taken my inheritance. She had stolen my face to serve as the mascot for her corporate vanity. "She's marketing your replacement," Hollis whispered, his voice tight with a lawyer's instinctive outrage. I watched the digital Tylee nod in agreement with Shannan's corporate platitudes. "They can steal my image, Hollis, but they can't simulate my soul," I replied, my voice steady despite the tremor of anger in my chest. Authenticity is the only thing a machine can never replicate. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a physical, printed photograph of my father. His hands were covered in sawdust, his eyes crinkled with genuine laughter. It was a tangible, undigitized piece of reality. I held it tightly, using its weight to ground myself against the haunting lie flickering on the screen. "Have you ever had your identity stolen by the very person who gave it to you?" The digital press conference ended, but the real war was just beginning. I turned to my laptop, attempting to authorize a transfer from a dormant investment account I had established years ago. It was my backup fund, intended to bridge the gap for Vanguard Alpha's next acquisition. The screen didn't show a confirmation. Instead, a red banner appeared. Account restricted. Please contact compliance. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't panic. I watched the cursor blink, a clinical reminder of the walls Shannan was building around me. Hollis leaned over, his eyes scanning the lines of code. "They've flagged you in the KYC database," he said, his voice dropping into a professional chill. Shannan's legal team filed a suspicious activity report. They're claiming financial misconduct linked to your social security number. In the United States, once you're gray-listed in the banking system under the Patriot Act reporting protocols, you become legally radioactive. Shannan wasn't just trying to keep me poor, she was trying to lock me out of the modern world. Every domestic bank would now view me as a liability. "When someone tries to lock all your doors, it's a sign they're afraid of what you're building," I said, leaning back in my chair. I didn't feel the desperation Shannan expected. I felt a cold, calculating brilliance. I signaled Hollis to open the Vanguard Alpha ledger. Months ago, anticipating this exact move, I had moved my primary liquid assets into an offshore trust structure where Hollis served as the trustee. Vanguard Alpha wasn't just a company. It was a fortress built outside the reach of Shannan's influence. "Let them lock the front door," I told him. "I've already bought the building next door." The doorbell buzzed, a specific rhythmic code. Elisa slipped into the loft, looking over her shoulder before she closed the heavy steel door. She didn't say a word. She simply handed me an encrypted flash drive. On it was the internal vendor list for Lumina Global. As I scrolled through the spreadsheets, the reality of Shannan's success began to unravel. She was burning through cash to keep the AI project afloat, and the IPO delays were causing a massive liquidity crunch. She was kiting payments, ignoring the invoices from small, family-owned businesses to maintain the appearance of her high society lifestyle. "Look at these names," I said, pointing to a small catering company and a boutique cleaning service. These were people who had worked for the Gonzalez family for years. Shannan was starving them to feed her digital ghost. I turned to Hollis. "I want Vanguard Alpha to buy their debt, not at a discount, at a premium. Pay their invoices in full tonight. Every worker gets their paycheck." Elisa looked at me with confusion. "Why are you helping her vendors, Tylee? You could let them sue her and sink the company." I looked at the map of Chicago properties on my wall, my finger hovering over a massive glass structure known as the Glass Prism. "The bridge I'm building is made of the people she stepped on," I explained. "You don't win by becoming a monster. You win by being the person the monster couldn't kill. Kindness is the only strategy she won't see coming." I watched the digital acquisition orders upload, one by one. I wasn't just buying debt, I was buying loyalty. I was building an empire out of the very lives Shannan considered expendable. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the skyline. The glass prism caught the moonlight, a shimmering tower of transparency that Shannan had just chosen for her upcoming Woman of the Decade gala. She believed she was renting a stage for her triumph. She didn't know that the entity she was paying, the entity that now owned the very air she breathed in that building, was me. "It's time to move into the glass prism," I whispered to the reflection in the window. "My mother is about to meet her new landlord." The neon lights of the West Loop faded into the rearview mirror as I drove toward the Harold Washington Library. Chicago at twilight always feels like a city of ghosts, and tonight I was going to meet two of them. I hadn't spoken to Alexis or Dylan since the night of the purification. To them, I was a defeated shadow, a girl without a name or a bank account, coming to beg for crumbs. They didn't know that every breath I took was now fueled by a quiet, steely resolve. I moved through the dimly lit aisles of the library, the scent of old paper and dust acting as a somber shield against the high society rot I had left behind. Alexis and Dylan were already seated in a remote corner, looking remarkably out of place among the students and researchers. They wore the Gonzalez brand-like armor, expensive silk, gold watches, and a thin veil of condescension. Dylan didn't even look up from his phone when I arrived. Alexis, however, offered a smile that was sharper than a surgical blade. "Tylee," she purred, her voice echoing slightly in the hollow silence of the library. "We wondered if you'd actually show up. You look tired." Life in the shadows doesn't suit the Gonzalez aesthetic, does it? I sat down, my hands folded neatly on the oak table. I didn't return the jab. I'm not here for an aesthetic, Alexis. I'm here because there is the matter of Dad's final intentions. Dylan let out a harsh, jagged laugh, finally setting his phone down. Final intentions? Tylee, you are erased, signed, sealed, delivered. You're legally a stranger to this family. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a cruel sort of triumph. But since you're here, I suppose we can be honest. It's not like you can do anything about it now. Alexis leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like ice water. Dad did leave a will, Tylee. He left you 40% of the voting shares in the family trust. He wanted you to have a seat at the table. My heart didn't race. It stopped. The betrayal wasn't just in the disownment. It was in the theft of my father's love. Where is it? I asked, my voice a low, steady thrum. Alexis shared a look with Dylan, a look of pure, unadulterated greed. In the fireplace, Dylan replied casually. The night he died, Shannan watched us feed it to the flames. Under Illinois law, a burned will doesn't exist. You're an intestate heir who was legally disowned by the surviving spouse. You're nothing. I looked at the empty space between us, the air suddenly thick with the weight of their crime. Destroying a will is a felony, a desperate act of spoliation of evidence, but they believed they were untouchable because the paper was gone. I closed my eyes for a brief second, picturing my father's hands, rough, calloused, and smelling of sawdust and honest work. A surge of love for him washed over me, far more powerful than the disgust I felt for the two people sitting across from me. Inheritance isn't just about what you leave for people, I said, my voice cutting through their arrogance like a cold wind. It's about what you leave in them. You burned a piece of paper, but you could never burn the truth of who he wanted me to be. You've turned yourselves into hollow shells for a few more zeros in a bank account. They smirked, convinced of their victory, but I walked away without another word. I didn't need to argue, I needed to act. I returned to the Vanguard Alpha safe house where Hollis was waiting in the shadows. He didn't ask how the meeting went. He simply handed me a digital recorder. Shannan approached me, he said, his voice a professional monotone that couldn't hide his disdain. She offered me $500,000 and the restoration of my law license. All I had to do was testify that you stole trade secrets from Lumina Global to build your empire. I listened to the recording. Shannan's voice was as smooth as silk, attempting to suborn perjury, a federal offense. She was desperate. She was trying to buy the one thing she couldn't control, Hollis's integrity. I looked at Hollis, a man who had lost everything once because of my mother's machinations. You could have had your life back, Hollis, I said softly. He shook his head, his gaze unwavering. Integrity is doing the right thing even when no one is watching, Tylee. Loyalty is a gift you give to those who deserve it, not a commodity you sell to the highest bidder. My life wasn't worth the price of your betrayal. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, a reminder that the family you choose is often stronger than the one you're born into. Keep the recording, I instructed, my mind already mapping out the next legal chess move. Upload it to the secure S3 bucket. We won't use it yet. We'll keep it as a shield, not a sword. My mother thinks she's the only one who knows how to play a long game. I turned to the window, the Chicago skyline laid out before me like a circuit board. Shannan was preparing a Father's Day campaign to boost Lumina's failing stock, using my father's memory as a marketing tool. I decided right then that I would not let her profit from his ghost. Hollis, initiate the Ryan Legacy Fund, I said, my voice ringing with a new energy. We aren't going to use the Gonzalez name. We're going to use Dad's middle name. We're going to rebuild the community workshop on the south side, the place where he actually started. If Shannan wants to sell a fake image, let her. We're going to restore the real one. I allocated a significant portion of our seed money to the project. Power isn't about how much you can take, it's about how much you can restore. My tablet buzzed with an urgent notification. It was a formal communication from the building management of the Glass Prism. Shannan had missed a minor insurance filing deadline, a small breach of her lease agreement. I looked at the eviction notice, a small smile playing on my lips. My mother believed she owned the stage. She was about to find out that the floor was no longer beneath her feet. Hollis, I said, looking at the notification. Send the notice to Lumina Global. Let them know the landlord expects full compliance within 24 hours, or the locks will be changed. The lock on my loft door clicked with a finality that felt like a shield being lowered. My conversation with the building management of the glass prism had been short, clinical, and devastatingly effective. Shannan was bleeding money, and she was now officially on notice. But as I settled into the dim glow of my workstation, I knew she wouldn't just retreat. A woman like my mother doesn't accept defeat. She rewrites the reality of the battlefield. The digital war was about to turn into something far more intimate and predatory. By morning, the first blow landed. It wasn't a legal filing or a stock sell-off. It was a headline in the Chicago Tribune, followed by a viral exclusive on every major social media platform. Shannan had leaked what she claimed were my private journals, doctored, rambling entries that painted a picture of a woman spiraling into a profound mental breakdown. Along with these were recovered emails where I supposedly admitted to hallucinations and erratic behavior. I watched the screen as Shannan appeared on a national morning show, her face a mask of sorrow, her eyes glistening with crocodile tears. "My daughter isn't a business rival," she told the anchor, her voice trembling with practiced precision. "Tylee is a sick woman who needs help. This Vanguard Alpha is nothing more than a manifestation of her paranoia. We are doing everything in our power to bring her home and get her the clinical care she requires." I watched her wipe away a tear that never quite fell. The most dangerous lie is the one told with a tear in the eye. But truth doesn't require an audience to be real. It only requires time. I sat in the silence of my loft, the flickering light of the television casting long, distorted shadows against the wall. A knock at the door, soft, rhythmic, interrupted the noise. Hollis entered, carrying a small bouquet of lilies, their fragrance heavy and sweet. "These were left at the front desk," he said, handing me a small, handwritten note. It was from the former head gardener at the estate, a man who had taught me how to prune roses when I was barely 7. The note was simple. "Even in the dirt, the best things grow. We remember the real you, Tylee." I touched the petals, feeling a sudden, sharp ache in my throat. In a world of digital lies, this small, organic truth felt like a lifeline. It was a reminder that even when the world is told you are insane, those who have seen your heart remain unswayed. The pressure intensified by late afternoon. I was reviewing supply chain logistics when Elisa sent a high-priority alert. Shannan had used her influence to hire a celebrity psychiatrist, a man known for handling the inconvenient relatives of the wealthy. Under the Illinois Mental Health Code, she had filed an emergency petition for evaluation. She wasn't just trying to smear me anymore. She was trying to legally erase my autonomy. If she could prove I was a danger to myself or others, she could secure a court-ordered admission and be appointed as the guardian of the estate. Vanguard Alpha would be hers by Monday morning. The medical transporters arrived just as the sun dipped below the Chicago skyline. I watched them on the security feed. 4 men in dark suits, carrying the clinical authority of a straitjacket. They didn't come with a siren. They came with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. "Tylee, they're in the lobby," Hollis said, his voice dropping into a low, protective growl. He reached for the phone to call our security detail, but I held up a hand. "Let them up, Hollis, and make sure the cloud-synced cameras are recording every single frame." When the door opened, the air in the loft turned cold. The lead man stepped forward, holding a clipboard like a weapon. "Miss Ryan, we have a court-authorized petition for your evaluation. You need to come with us voluntarily, or we will be forced to restrain you for your own safety." I didn't stand up. I didn't scream. I sat perfectly still, my hands resting flat on the desk. "I am Tylee Ryan," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "I am currently in full possession of my faculties. I am being represented by counsel. Under the 4th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, you have no legal right to enter this private residence without a signed warrant from a judge, which your petition, not yet a court order, is not." The man's face reddened. He moved closer, his hand reaching for my arm. I didn't flinch. I looked directly into the camera lens hidden in the bookshelf. "You are being recorded," I told him, my tone conversational. Every aggressive movement you make is being uploaded to a secure server. If you touch me, you are committing battery under Illinois law, and I will prosecute you to the fullest extent of the criminal and civil codes. For 10 minutes, they tried to bait me. They insulted me, they questioned my sanity, and they grew increasingly frustrated by my lack of reaction. But I remained stoic. You can't gaslight someone who has already found their own light. The stalemate broke when Hollis walked in with a team of independent legal experts and a board-certified psychiatrist we had flown in from New York. "Gentlemen," Hollis said, his voice booming with the authority of a man who had regained his purpose. "This is an abuse of process. We have already filed a counter-injunction and a suit for defamation per se. Your petition is based on perjured testimony, and we are ready to prove it." Within an hour, the transporters retreated, their clinical masks slipping to reveal the fear of a looming lawsuit. I underwent a voluntary, recorded psychiatric evaluation right there in my living room. The independent doctor asked me about my history, my business, and my motivations. I answered every question with a cognitive clarity that made Shannan's journals look like the fiction they were. When he was finished, the doctor turned to Hollis. "She is more lucid than the people who sent those men here," he said, signing the clearance papers. Tylee Ryan was legally, medically, and undeniably sane. Before the corrupt psychiatrist could flee the city, I had Hollis send him a private courier. Inside was a copy of the evaluation I had just passed and a short note. "Healing is a noble calling. Don't trade your stethoscope for a leash. I won't destroy your career if you tell the truth about who paid you to sign that petition." I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to be a wall they couldn't climb over. They tried to make me doubt my own mind because they couldn't control my actions, I told Elisa as she arrived with the final gala details. She looked at me with a mixture of awe and relief. "Shannan just spent the last of Lumina's liquidity," Elisa revealed, her voice hushed. "She's officially signed the lease for the final gala at the Glass Prism. She thinks it's her sanctuary." I looked at the signed lease agreement on my screen, the one I had authorized as the anonymous owner of the building. My mother believed she was stepping onto a stage that would restore her glory. She didn't realize she had just signed the deed to her own prison. The trap was set, the contracts were ironclad, and for the first time I could feel the weight of my father's legacy shifting toward justice. The Chicago skyline stood as a jagged silhouette of glass and steel against the bruising purple of the evening sky. My father used to say that this city was built on promises, but I was learning it was actually held together by the fine print. As I sat in the shadows of the Vanguard Alpha penthouse, watching the live feed from the Lumina Global boardroom, I realized the stage was finally set. Shannan was no longer the untouchable titan she pretended to be. Behind the designer suits and the flawless press releases, she was drowning. Her creditors were circling like sharks in shallow water, and the Woman of the Decade gala at the Glass Prism was her desperate final prayer for a bailout. The screen flickered, showing my mother seated at the head of a mahogany table. She looked haggard, the skin around her eyes tight despite the layers of expensive foundation. Across from her sat Hollis, acting as the anonymous face of the building's ownership. Shannan needed this venue to project an image of absolute power to the private equity investors she was courting. Without the Glass Prism, her house of cards would fold before the first drink was served. She reached for the lease agreement with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, a small crack in her polished armor that only a daughter could recognize. "The deposit is unusually high, even for a premier location," Shannan remarked, her voice trying to maintain its characteristic edge. Hollis didn't blink. He pushed the document closer to her. "The owner values the integrity of the Glass Prism above all else, Miss Gonzalez. High stakes require high security." Shannan scoffed, a familiar, arrogant curl touching her lips. "Appearance is the only reality that matters in this city. If the price of perfection is a few extra million, so be it." I watched her sign the initial pages, oblivious to the fact that she was stepping into a cage. A house built on appearances is just a prison with better lighting. Real power doesn't need to be seen. It just needs to be certain. Watching her through the hidden camera, I saw her pause, her pen hovering over the final page. For a fleeting, foolish second, a flicker of pity stirred in my chest. I remembered her tucking me in when I was 6, before the greed had completely hollowed her out. But then I looked at the silver locket on my desk, the one she had tried to strip from me along with my name. Pity died a cold death. Boundaries are not acts of hate. They are acts of self-preservation. I wasn't the one breaking her. I was simply the one handing her the mirror to see the wreckage she had created. "I am not breaking you, Mother," I whispered to the silent monitor. "I am letting you reap what you sowed." Then came the moment that turned a simple lease into a blood contract. Shannan reached the final section, the personal guarantee, and the moral turpitude contingency. Hollis had meticulously drafted these clauses under the strictest interpretations of U.S. commercial law. By signing, Shannan wasn't just committing Lumina Global's funds. She was cross-collateralizing her personal estate, her private art collection, and every remaining share of her company. If her public reputation caused even a 10% drop in the building's projected brand value, the landlord, me, had the legal right to seize everything she owned as immediate collateral. Shannan signed the final page with a flourish of gold ink. She believed her reputation was an immovable mountain, a fortress of PR that no truth could ever breach. She thought she was dealing with a greedy developer looking for a payout. She had no idea the developer was the daughter she had legally erased and publicly shamed. As Hollis gathered the documents, I felt a heavy, cold momentum settle in my gut. Character is destiny. She thought she was signing a lease for a stage, but she was signing a deed to her own reckoning. I instructed Hollis via an encrypted text to finalize the filing with the Cook County Recorder of Deeds immediately. The trap was now ironclad, but Shannan's intuition had always been her sharpest weapon, and even in her desperation, it began to flare. Later that night, Elisa sent an urgent coded alert. Shannan had been cross-referencing badge swipes and internal server logs. She had discovered that Elisa had been accessing restricted financial files, the very files that proved Shannan was kiting payments and committing investor fraud. My mother didn't fire her. That would have been too simple. Instead, the feed in the Lumina boardroom went dark. 10 minutes later, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Elisa. "They found out. I'm at the South Loop warehouse. They're taking the records. Help." My blood turned to ice. I knew Elisa. We had spent hundreds of hours building the safety protocols for Vanguard Alpha. She would never ask for help without using the specific code word we had established. Phoenix. This wasn't Elisa. This was Shannan using Elisa's phone as a lure. It was a predator's invitation, a trap designed to draw me out into the open so Shannan's hired medical transporters could snatch me and force the psychiatric commitment she so desperately needed to invalidate my contracts. "Tylee, don't go," Hollis warned, his hand on my shoulder. "It's a setup. We can call the authorities." I looked at the screen, then at the empty chair where Elisa usually sat. She had risked everything to help me find the truth about my father's will. She wasn't an employee. She was the sister I chose. "The Empire can burn, Hollis, but we don't leave people behind," I said, my voice low and dangerous. I knew Shannan was watching, waiting for me to break my stoic silence and run to the rescue. She wanted to play God with people's lives. I reached for my coat and the small digital recorder that held the evidence of Shannan's attempted bribes. The tires of my SUV hummed against the asphalt of the South Loop, a desolate industrial stretch where the city's ambition goes to die. Shannan thought she had found my weakness, but she was about to realize that my loyalty wasn't a liability. It was the very thing that would give me the strength to finish this. It was time for her to learn that even gods can fall when they forget they are mortal. I pulled up to the rusted warehouse, the air smelling of damp concrete and old oil. I wasn't the trembling daughter Shannan expected. I was the architect of her final lesson. Hollis sat in the passenger seat, his laptop glowing like a tactical map. We weren't walking into a trap. We were executing a legal breach. Earlier that evening, Hollis had secured an emergency writ of habeas corpus, while my private security team tracked Elisa's phone signal. As we moved towards the side entrance, the 4 medical transporters Shannan had hired stepped out of the shadows, needles and restraints in hand. They didn't see the hidden cameras mounted on our tactical vests, Nor did they anticipate the 3 black SUVs that boxed them in within seconds. The confrontation was brief. Under the authority of the writ, my team neutralized the transporters without firing a shot. Inside, I found Elisa tied to a chair in a soundproofed office, her eyes wide with a terror that made my blood boil. I didn't care about the stolen files or the corporate secrets scattered on the floor. I knelt beside her, cutting the zip ties with a steady hand. "No asset is worth more than the breath in your lungs, Elisa," I whispered, pulling her into a brief, fierce hug. "We are leaving together." Hollis urged me to call the Chicago PD immediately to file kidnapping charges, but I shook my head. The timing wasn't right for a precinct lobby. "If you want to heal a wound, you don't just cover it with a bandage, you have to let the light hit the rot," I told him, looking at the time. "Tonight, the light belongs to me. Let the police wait until the cameras are rolling at the glass prism." I realized then that Shannan's hate was a fire that consumed only the vessel carrying it. I chose to be the water, cold, deep, and inevitable. 1 hour later, I stood in the wings of the grand ballroom at the glass prism. The air was electric, filled with the scent of lilies and the hushed chatter of Chicago's elite. On stage, Shannan stood under a spotlight that made her look like a saint. She was receiving the Woman of the Decade award, her voice smooth as silk as she began a speech about family integrity and moral legacy. It was a masterpiece of hypocrisy, a final performance for the investors she hoped to swindle one last time. Suddenly, the massive LED screens behind her flickered. The Lumina AI avatar, which was supposed to be a perfected version of me, began to glitch into static. In its place, the real footage from the night of my purification began to play, the high-definition record of Shannan taping over my face in the family portrait. The crowd went silent as the video cut to Alexis and Dylan laughing while they fed my father's will into the fireplace. Hollis had legally subrogated the building's digital rights. Under the personal guarantee contract Shannan signed, I had every right to correct the public record to protect the building's brand. Shannan's scream of "turn it off" was drowned out by the collective gasp of the audience. I walked out onto the stage, not in a gown, but in the sharp, black suit of a CEO who had just closed the biggest deal of her life. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I stood 5 feet from her, my voice carrying through the silent hall with a quiet, regal power. "You didn't just erase my name, Shannan," I said, my gaze never wavering. "You tried to erase the heart of this family. But truth is like the sun. You can block it for a while, but it always finds a way to rise." The room erupted into chaos. The elite of Chicago watched as the Woman of the Decade mask shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Shannan turned to Dylan and Alexis, her hands reaching out for the children she had favored. But they didn't move. Dylan stepped back, his face a mask of cold calculation. "The wire transfer is complete, Mother," he said, loud enough for the front row to hear. "The remaining $50 million is in our offshore accounts. We aren't going down with your fraud." They turned and fled through the service exit, leaving Shannan standing alone on the stage she had rented with my money. Because Shannan had signed the personal guarantee in Chapter 5, I signaled Hollis. Within seconds, a notice of lien and a freeze order were filed against every personal asset she possessed. She was legally and financially homeless before she could even step off the podium. Shannan collapsed onto the floor, the heavy gold award clattering beside her like a piece of junk. I walked over, looking down at the woman who had tried to convince the world I was insane. I didn't mock her. I didn't gloat. I simply offered her my hand to help her stand. "Why?" she whispered, her voice broken and raw. "Because I am the daughter you didn't want, but I am still the person my father raised," I replied. "You lost your empire because you loved power more than people. You forgot that you can't own a soul." As the police entered the ballroom to escort Shannan out for questioning regarding the medical kidnap attempt, I noticed a single heavy folder in the ruins of her briefcase. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the past in my hands. It was the original deed to my father's first workshop, the one Shannan had hidden to prove he had left me nothing. I clutched the folder to my chest, a final, quiet victory for the man they had tried to forget. There was one last thing to fix. The silence that followed the collapse of Shannan's empire was not empty. It was heavy with the weight of things finally settled. As I stood looking at the vacant, glittering hall of the glass prism, I understood that building a foundation on truth is the only way to carry the weight of a life. The ghosts of the gala had long since faded, replaced by the clinical reality of bankruptcy filings and legal repossessions. I had spent 7 years in the cold, and now, the warmth of the rising sun over Lake Michigan felt like a benediction. 1 week after the public reckoning, I walked into Shannan's former office at Lumina Global. The room had been stripped of its vanity. The designer furniture was gone, leaving only the indentations in the plush carpet where her power once sat. Shannan was there, sitting by the window in a simple coat, looking at a city that no longer recognized her name. I didn't bring a team of lawyers this time. I only brought a single, weathered folder. I placed the original deed to my father's first workshop on the desk between us. I didn't come to gloat over the ruins. The bankruptcy court has finalized the liquidation, I said, my voice steady and devoid of the bitterness that used to define our interactions. As your primary creditor, I've established an irrevocable trust. You'll have a modest apartment in Lincoln Park and a stipend for lifelong medical care. Shannan looked at the folder, her hands trembling as she touched the aged paper. She asked if this was my way of keeping her on a leash. I looked at her, truly seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. It's not a leash, Shannan, it's a life. I am giving you the peace you never allowed yourself to have because you were too busy chasing a shadow. You don't build a future by carrying the ashes of the past. A quiet understanding passed between us, a bridge built over a canyon of years. I could choose to be the daughter she tried to erase, or I could choose to be the woman my father believed I could be. I chose the latter. We walked together to the artisan wing of the glass prism, where the massive glass-blowing furnace hummed with a 2000-degree heat. I produced the original, formal dissolution of familial ties, the very papers I had signed with my left hand on that freezing night 7 years ago. You were the one who wanted these to exist, I said, handing her the legal document. Now, you should be the one to let them go. Shannan took the papers, her eyes reflecting the white heat of the furnace. She tossed them into the flames. We watched as the ink and the lies vanished into the fire, turning into nothing more than a flicker of light. In that moment, I wasn't just destroying a legal contract. I was destroying the power she held over my identity. I was no longer the erased daughter. I was the architect of my own son. Hollis stood in the shadows, holding the vacatur of disownment and the restoration of identity documents he had filed that morning. Legally, I was now free to reclaim the Gonzalez name, but I shook my head. I'll remain Tylee Ryan, I told him. I've spent 7 years earning that name. I'll restore my father's heritage, but I'll keep the identity I built in the dark. I looked at Shannan one last time. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of your shadow. Sometimes the things we break can be rebuilt stronger, but only if everyone admits they were broken first. I climbed to the rooftop garden, the golden hour light spilling over the Chicago skyline like spilled honey. Below me, Vanguard Alpha was coming to life. I could see Elisa in the courtyard and Mrs. Gable, the former coat check lady, leading a group of new employees. My empire wasn't built of steel and glass. It was built of the people I had lifted up while others were trying to push me down. My phone buzzed with a call from Hollis about a new project in New York. It can wait until Monday, Hollis, I said, watching a hawk circle the skyscrapers. Today I'm just going to breathe. I pulled the silver locket from my pocket, rubbed the worn metal one last time, and then tucked it away in a drawer. I didn't need the physical reminder anymore. I carried his strength in my every step. Wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's the number of lives that are better because you existed. I didn't win by taking her stage. I won by building a theater where everyone has a seat. It was a quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need a standing ovation to feel complete. As the morning sun fully claimed the city, I looked out at the horizon. Closure doesn't come from an apology you might never get. It comes from the moment you decide your worth is non-negotiable. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone off the hook for what they did. It's about refusing to let their shadow darken your future any longer. To those of you who have ever been made to feel invisible by the people who were supposed to see you most, remember that a seed grows best when it's buried in the dark. I know many of you have faced your own winter and had to find the warmth within yourselves to survive. What was the moment you finally decided that your worth was non-negotiable? Share your journey with me in the comments below. I'm here, and I'm listening.